social and behavioral science with the brain. So his work has been recognized with a 2012 Edison Award nomination and recently has been featured in publications including Harvard Business Review, Education Weekly, Neural Connections, Advances in Body, Mind, Medicine, and just a whole lot more. So Dr. Bonstetter is a professor emeritus of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He has given speeches in all 50 states and 17 countries. He is also a dual patent holder regarding validating IP-sative assessments. He might be able to explain what that is. He also patented a technique where using an EEG, gamma waves are viewed in the brain's frontal lobe to determine whether or not a person is responding with integrity, validating the assessment. So this is why I had Dr. Bonstetter on. We all call him Dr. Ron or Ron. He's a pretty casual guy. So I want to welcome Dr. Ron. Thank you for being here and giving us your valuable, valuable time today.
I don't know about valuable time, but I'm excited to be with you. So I appreciate that. You know, as you were reading that list, there is one that you missed that I'm actually pretty excited about. For 5 years, I joined this organization called the International Society for Neurofeedback and Research. And it's sort of an interesting group. And I'm sort of an outsider because I didn't, 5 years is all I've been involved in this field. And all of a sudden at the banquet, I hear my name. And I'm given the one award each year that's given. It's called First Person Science Award. And so last fall, I received the First Person Science Award, the Joe Camilla Award for outstanding research in identifying and helping people grow personally. And that was exciting to have that, especially when it's named for Joe Camilla. Joe Camilla is still alive at 93. I met him the very first year I was there. And this is a man that's walking with 2 canes. And I sat down and I say, I just want the privilege of meeting you and saying hello. He says, I've read your research and I have the following questions. I want to be able to do that when I'm 93.
That's right. Don't we all want to have brains that function that well at 90?
It just blew me away.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. It's funny what people can read about us and what they put in our bio, but there's always something that sticks out for each one of us that is the thing we're most proud of, right? So I really appreciate you bringing that up. So I'm going to jump right into the questions. And unless you want to go ahead and, oh, look at you. Awesome. Why don't we just let you get started?
Yeah, let's do it in context. I think questions. A lot of them will be hit.
Awesome.
So, but I don't mind interruptions, by the way. In fact, if I have one problem, it's caffeine. And I made a mistake today. And, I've been known to be the Energizer bunny. And so I try not to have caffeine before I present, but
awesome.
So we'll just, when you have questions, let's engage and make it happen, make it all happen. I want to, first of all, point out that what I'm sharing with you is a team effort. And there's something about TTI that it has a family feel. And even though my name is Bonstetter, really the entire staff have a feeling of togetherness that I want to somehow share today. And so this research team is a phenomenal group. I'm going to be sharing a lot of work from Dr. Garrick today, who takes care of all of our quantitative work. He is phenomenal thinker and writer. I mean, he has it all. He then directs Robert, which is right below him on the left, and Robert does the scout work and makes sure all those statistics match, and he does all the work. On the other side, I get Dustin and Aaron who get to work with me in neurology. And we just have a ball learning all this stuff together. So it's a great team. With that in mind, let's take a look at some things. First of all, this is a reminder for me. Remember, I said caffeine. So I got it. Just relax a little bit. And actually, I do study meditation, by the way, and that's another sidebar that we could discuss. But at any rate, realizing that we are in a stressful time. And taking time for yourself is crucial. And one of the best ways to do that are some breathing exercises. And if you want to learn more about that, we can talk about it. So I want to talk to you just briefly of what I want to do today. I want to recognize that the uniqueness of our research, some things we're doing for you behind the scenes that makes our company worthy of your support and use, all right? So it's not a sale job. It's going to be sincere information about what we do and what we don't do. I'm pretty transparent. I'm going to try to describe why research is important to you, but I have to admit I don't do a very good job of this. I'm an off-scale theoretical. I love learning, and the application of learning actually dirties the knowledge in my mind. so I have a problem, you know. The high utilitarians and I don't know how to work with a high utilitarian. They keep asking about ROI, and I keep saying, what's region of interest in the brain got to do with what I do?
Nice. I'll remember that one.
I seriously did that to my brother when he talked about ROI to me, and I said, region of interest in the brain? What the heck? Anyway. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing and where we're going, and I think that's sort of exciting. The bottom line is I'm hoping to build confidence, and we'll let Dave come in too so that he can be a part of this.
Nice.
So I want to build confidence in what we do for you. And when you have problems and things that we're not doing, you let us know so that we can try to figure out how to help. And then the last thing is I do want to answer questions, because I had to put this together in a vacuum, and you are the only way that I can really address what needs to be done. So we're going to accomplish all of that. Now, I want to share a different level. Recognize that one of the problems I have, and if you listen to that thing, I mean, there are a lot of topics that Linda mentioned that I could talk about. And I have to be careful with what I talk about, because I could go off in left field and bury you with crap that nobody wants to know. So what I'm going to try to do is I want you to recognize that I used to read a book a day, but you know, this job actually is sort of time consuming, but I still try to read a book every week. And so these are just some books I've read recently that I thought were really good books, including this one. And I'm not necessarily supposed to support other alternative assessments, but I have to tell you, positive intelligence is an awesome assessment. And it comes out of Stanford, and there's some good things. They do not replicate what we do, but I think they really build on it. So that's a good book and a good assessment. You go to positiveintelligence.com, and I think you could get some, you can actually take the 5-minute assessment and get it back.
Oh,
So
cool.
just interesting things. Does anybody taken a positive intelligence assessment or that program? Okay, it's a leadership program. It's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next. I want you to realize that I am going to try to do things at a level that makes sense. And I'm not, I don't mean that in a derogatory fashion, but I could start using language like neophenomenological research that nobody cares about. So I'm going to really try to make sure that I don't do things like that. This is a coffee design that I did the other day that's just a petroglyph. So this would be and by the way, I do coffee designs every morning. So I want to build confidence in the process. And so I want you to realize that we've got your back. So that was my attempt at humor. But I also could get carried away, and I could start doing talks that really are more than what you need. So I'm going to make sure that we stay sweet and keep things down to earth. On the other hand, you have to remember that that Bernie is everywhere, and he even showed up in my coffee this morning.
A Bernie meme.
So Bernie was in my. But every day I do a coffee design. And if you are interested, you can go to, if you're on Instagram, you can welcome to follow me and see what I did every day with coffee design. Some days are easier than others. So with that in mind, the purpose in sharing that is that I'm not going to bury you with this picture. I'm going to go over some highlights that I think make sense. So let's talk about what resources are available to you and to your clients and to people you want to really help grow. When I came here, there was not one-stop shopping. I came in 2011. And so I started to create what's out there. And I created this research page, which can be obtained by going to, I think it's at the bottom of the screen, isn't it? I've got it covered, so I can't see it. But at any rate, you should have a screen there that tells you where you can go.
Yeah, there's a hyperlink.
Okay, so each of these then have papers that you could download, and they're all PDFs that you can download, okay? And I propagate that constantly. We're updating this constantly. So within that, for example, on the peer-reviewed papers, you might find response processing validation protocol using neurophenomenological gamma asymmetry. And it talks about how we actually use the brain imaging to improve our ipsative assessments. There's your word, Linda.
Oh, thank you.
And since my arrival, we have 32 peer-reviewed papers. Now, why is that important? It's important for credibility, because a peer-reviewed paper, every one of those are blind reviews. So they're read by somebody, and if it has value, and if it is accurate, it gets published. That can take on average 18 months to accomplish, by the way. So it's not something you just crank out and get it published next month. I think it's important to realize that since my arrival, prior to my arrival, we had no peer-reviewed papers. So we're building credibility. And I would say that the research team, even though we're here to help you and meet your needs, we're also planning for tomorrow. So we're really looking at what the next level might require. This is what the next level requires.
Yeah.
For example, white papers. Within that, you will find 49 published white papers. And here's a sample on the application of logistic regression and identifying target populations using trimetric EQ variables. I mean, this is heavy stuff, and it's there when you need it. Okay, I'm going to come back to that concept in a moment. In addition, if you want to do a quick cut and paste, I have gone to the trouble of creating APA citations for every single one of these papers. I do not add a paper unless I add a citation that you can cut and paste into a bibliography. So if you want to blow somebody away, you can just cut and paste all 49 white papers, the reference list, and there's your reference list. But I think they're...
Dr. Ron, if I can interrupt you for a second. So these are all people who have, you know, they work for Haskell, they're rising stars, they're, you know, they're just learning DISC, that sort of things. When you think about all of this research available, is there any one that you think, oh, they may find this piece interesting because it applies to them in some way, and they're like, this course is really focused on self-awareness?
Yeah, I'm going to share a couple of samples. You're absolutely right. Most of this is here when somebody tries to corner you and say that this is Myers-Briggs.
Right.
So this is just available to sort of lay the foundation that it's real. But you're absolutely right. I'll show some examples that really make a difference. For example, these are, again, over the top. But when somebody questions it, you can show them that we have technical reports that blow people away. These are over 200 pages of analysis on each of our assessments. Those two are already in print. You see the dates. This one is coming out February 15th, so that we will have a complete manual on the technical manual itself. And I want you to recognize that your demographic information becomes valuable. So we can tell you the kinds of people that take our assessments, and we can tell you the percentage of males and females. We can tell you the breakdown of ethnicity, and we can also tell you age breakdowns. And you know, this age breakdown was upsetting to me. I looked at, I said, oh yeah, let's see, when was I born? Oh, less than 1% of the population. All of a sudden I felt old.
You look great. You don't look old, Dr. Ron.
No, that was an inappropriate feeling. So let's move right on. On the other hand, we do have about 80% of the people we survey that are employed. And so that's interesting, because people used to say, oh, I bet you just collect data on students. No, we don't. You know, and we actually separate them out when we do analysis too. So the demographics are important because we also can do some things that start making sense for you. For example, we can match that. Does everybody know what ONET jobs are?
No.
No.
Okay, real quickly, the government has decided that somebody can get this big meeting together and they're going to decide that there's 28 different industries that people are employed in. And out of those 28, there are well over 1,000, almost 2,000 jobs that people could have within these various industries. We actually have taken a subset of ONET, and in the demographics, we ask you what job you're in.
Ah.
And that helps us because all of a sudden we now can take those of you that do what you do, group them, and see if they have some common characteristics. And that becomes really cool. It's a process that involves, this is a shot that I took of Eric last week while he was showing me what he did. But that graph becomes crucial. Look at that graph. He says if everything is in the light blue in the bottom, or even less than the light blue, it indicates that our assessments are no better than chance. Or if it's actually less, they're worse than chance. On the other hand, we have just finished analyzing 170 different jobs that show graphs like this. That the area under the graph would indicate that we have the ability to identify CEOs with a 0.75 accuracy.
Wow.
I mean, I could go up the road to Las Vegas and make money on that.
So let me double click on this. So someone takes an assessment, a group of people take an assessment, and you would be able, through those sets of assessments, to be able to tell who's most likely in a CEO position. Wow.
Yes.
That's groundbreaking.
And let me show you some new stuff that's just coming out. This is unpublished. This will come out on the 15th of February. I just drew you some samples. So here's engineering managers. And area under the curve becomes important again, 0.68. In other words, a set of variables, and actually the number one variable that differentiates this group is the adapted C.
Really? Huh.
Now this does not circumvent brain benchmarking, but it gives you an indication where you ought to look, okay? So I thought that was really fun. I looked at all of them again this morning. Here's another one on just automotive engineers. We can identify them at a 0.69.
Wow.
This is, in other words, we take those people that told us that they're automotive engineers, and in this case, there were 128, and we then compare them to our population as a whole, 159,000. And it comes up then with this differentiation. These are different. These people are different. And they're different because of their people orientation and their natural C. Okay?
Wow.
Now, because all of us have jobs that at times we wish we were somewhere else doing something else, I decided maybe I should look for a career change. So I looked at baristas just to see if I have a match, if there's a possibility. First of all, man, frequent change. I love frequent change. Natural eye. Hey, I love talking. Maybe I could be a barista, But if you're going to be a barista, let's go all the way. What about just being a bartender? Frequent interaction with others. Wow. And 0.73, we can identify bartenders better than CEOs.
Wow.
I don't know. I just find that fun.
Is that like you ran correlations on all of them, and whatever was the strongest correlation is what ends up in that variable box?
Yes, that's correct. But it also indicates whether or not that area above the curve becomes crucial.
Yeah.
Because we're doing two things there. Yes, we're identifying the key characteristic, but we're also identifying whether this is better than a statistical average that you could be anybody.
All right, yeah.
All 170 are statistically significant that we can identify differences with our assessments.
Wow.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Okay, so here's what I'm doing for you. Some of these papers I think have some awesome insights, but they're not written for you. I intentionally wrote those for the next level, for the next group of people that question us, industrial and organizational psychologists, people like that. So what I've done is taken the key papers, and I'm in the process of writing what we're calling research cliff notes. And so, for example, this paper that I mentioned earlier, there's the title. It's published in Neurophysiology, and it becomes what TTISI research team is doing to improve assessment questions.
We get
Okay.
a lot of the questions about the questions, I can tell
Yeah.
you that.
Yeah. And so let's try to answer some of that for people.
Okay.
In addition, 4 times a year, I do research on parade. And I just do something that I've been reading about and something I think ought to be highlighted for general population. You're more than welcome to join those sessions and have fun with it. Now we get the fun stuff. This is all about your brain. Yeah, my emotions made me do it. Let's talk a little bit about how you answer the questions and what you need to know about yourself to be even better than you are. So to start with, I have to tell you that I was sort of where you were 30 years ago. My brother talked me into using DISC. And what's funny, sidebar conversation, I failed as a professor. I mean, I really did. I remember going in to class and saying, you know, we're off on a journey together for the next 18 months. You're going to be with me for 3 semesters. And there is no syllabus because what we do today will dictate what we do tomorrow. And there are no tests because I don't know how to test whether you could ever be a good teacher with a paper and pencil. And several years ago, a young lady called me and she said, I have to tell you, the first day of class I was with you and I went home crying. And so I went to my brother because this class just didn't seem to be working real well. And he said, you ought to give them this assessment and then you'll understand them better. Well, to make a long story short, yes, I gave them the assessment so I could understand what was wrong with them. And I came to the realization that it was all me. I was the problem. I was an off-scale D and my entire audience were S and Cs.
Oh my.
And I had no clue how to talk to them. I had no clue how to meet their needs. And so it was a real wake-up call to me. To make a long story even a little longer, I wrote all this up because it was very insightful for me. I mean, I'm the problem. And lo and behold, it ended up getting submitted to the National Search for Excellence in Science Education. I won an award for the Outstanding Teacher Preparation Program in the nation, and was flown to Washington where Carl Sagan gave me an award, which was sort of cool. Backstage, Carl said, I have no idea why I'm giving you this award. Give me your elevator pitch. And that was the first time I used the words, the science of self. And I said, we sort of teach the science of self. We get people to understand self. I'm in a teacher preparation program and I can't have children teaching children. I got to have these people understand themselves before they can be a teacher. So I actually teach about self before I ever teach them how to teach. So as a result of being in that session, my wife, I positioned her in the front row so she could get a picture of us. And that's the picture she took.
Oh no.
If it weren't for the fingerprints on the plaque, there's no evidence that he ever did it.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
When I came back, I did a presentation to the faculty. I don't know how many of you are still associated with professors, but they're pretty arrogant people. Anyone with a PhD is closer to God than anyone else. And if you don't believe it, just ask them. So I'm presenting to the faculty about what it is I do. And about halfway through, the dean stands up. He puts his hands right square on the table in front of him. And he says, we do not use tarot cards for decision making. Okay? I'm telling you this because I'm telling you why I'm sharing what I'm sharing. That day, I'll tell you my comment to him, and I think you'll be shocked. I said, you're absolutely right. I have absolutely no evidence that you would buy into to support that this works. I know it works. I can't prove it to you. And I think he was a little set back by that, but you got to remember what high Ds are also sort of arrogant SOBs. So I went home and decided I will answer that question if it takes to my dying day. The next week, I went over to the Med Center and I started interviewing department chairs. And I said, here's the assessment I use. I need to figure out if it's real. I don't know who to work with. And they said, well, not me, not me. I got shipped out of about a dozen different departments and finally went to the epilepsy center. And Dr. Sengi says, I'll tell you what, you have to understand brain and decision-making at a level that you have no clue. I can help you do that if you help me get my residents to understand how to have bedside manner. So we formed a relationship, and I did workshops on listening skill and all kinds of nonverbal communication for all his residents. And then, and I did this for 4 years. Every Tuesday, I would do grand rounds and spend the day with the interns. So I really started to learn what it took to do this. As a result, when I got down here, I set up my own lab. And I brought in all my equipment so that I could continue doing brain scans to see what's going on. This is what my screen looks like in real time.
Wow.
I get to see all of the brain activity, not only quantitative in the upper left-hand corner, but qualitatively in what's called S-Loretta imaging. And I get to see the images. I'm going to point out just one image for the time being. I want you to look at that largest brain. Recognize that brain is looking at you. And the redder the brain, the more activity. The less activity would be the light blue. Mm. So it goes from blues to greens, yellow, and then into red, okay? And so I'm able to determine the intensity of what's going on and the location. Intensity and location. Keep that in mind. I then collect all this EEG that's coming out of here, and I throw on the screen our assessment items while people are actually hooked up, and I can grab what's going on in their brain. And those green bands would represent when they saw one of the items on the screen. And then it's off screen. I ask them to do their blinking when it's off screen. And I hope this is sort of making sense. So I'm doing something nobody else has done, by the way. So it was sort of exciting.
It's so
and as a result, pardon? Okay, here's what we find. I'm going to generalize. There are 3 basic things I learned. I can see rejection in your brain. When you do rejection, it is a right hemisphere flare. Remember, the brain is looking at you. No, I don't agree. Then I get, this is the best I could do for poker face. I don't play poker, so this is why. At any rate, it's sort of across the thing. I can't really identify what emotion you have. And then when you are with me, and yes, that's accurate, it is a left hemisphere flare. Isn't that exciting? Now let's put this tool to work. Let's see what this really looks like. I'm able to figure out what you look like from enthusiastic all the way to total rejection and everything in between. I'm able to see that in your brain instantaneously. And by the way, when I say instantaneously, I'm pulling these images at 200ths of a second, and you haven't even had a cognitive thought until you had 1/3 of a second. I'm pulling your emotion.
So a rejection is less emotional, but like an acceptance or appreciation is much more emotionally involved.
No, I would say all of these are showing emotion. I would say they're all showing emotion. What I'm really showing you is the direction of that emotion, where you have a major component here. You're getting both on enthusiasm. Actually, enthusiasm is so intense that it carries over to both sides. And by the way, I just cut it off at rejection. I could also take you to anger. Now you see both sides.
Sure.
Oh,
sure. I think that makes sense.
So it's sort of interesting how that works. So let's show you a real experiment. I always throw this in just for fun. And I think it's because I was a professor for over 30 years. I had to publish. That's the only thing that anybody ever thought was important, is that you either publish or perish. And if somebody would reference me with one N in my name, I mean, it just pissed me off, to be honest with you. It really did. I mean, I lost a citation. So I decided to throw that in and see what happens. When we have people's names spelled correctly, almost always, this is what you see. Yeah, left hemisphere, that's me. And then you screw up their name somehow, and that's what happens. And I use this to get buy-in when I do the review with them, the debrief. And they go, yeah, I didn't like that. Why did you do that? So here's a behavior experiment. So the person answered the questions in this order. One was bold and daring, supportive, charming, and all the way down to careful and calculated was number 4. Here are the brain images. Now it's getting both sides, but there's still a dominance on the left side. They're agreeing with bold and daring. What's interesting is that I can take just the brain images and I can tell you what their number 1 answer is 84% of the time.
Wow.
On 2 and 3, I'm really 50-50. I can't do a very good job of matching those two. But here's what excited me and where I really want to give you a take home today for each of us to think about. If there's one major take home, it's in the next slide right here when I show you this image. 100% of the time, I can tell you what you're not. I looked at this data and I remember my brother saying, "You're excited about that, but why?" I said, just think about it. If you go out to a new restaurant, which I haven't done for a year now, if you go out to a new restaurant and the first thing you do is look at the menu and decide what you won't eat. Kale, gone, cilantro, gone, sushi, gone. So there are things, but then I don't know what to eat. And it irritates me. We've been married 46 years, but I still ask the waiter or waitress, so out of these 3, which one would you choose? And my wife, when she leaves, says, once again, she chose the most expensive. Will you ever learn? But it's data. I love data. So if you take a look at this, the bottom line is that when we score the disc, we use 3 and 4 for your natural style. The real you is being shown with 3 and 4. What you're not is the real you. Okay? I hope that makes sense. It's sort of exciting that we can tie that together. And this is not new. I'm just showing an article where back in 97, we had somebody, literally write that this negation is what we're all about. It's really all about negation in our implicit memories.
Well, I was going to tell you, because I wanted to tie this to what they're about to do. So their February work is about moving from like drama to empowerment. I don't know if you've seen David Emerald's work, but when you talk about this, I tie it to that because, people, you will ask people what they don't want, and boy, can they tell you. But when you try to ask them what they do want, it's more perplexing to them. Right? It's so clear that they've decided what they don't want. It's harder for us to develop, the thought processes that allow us to figure out what we do want.
And when I first saw this data, it was a flashback to, again, my first few years of teaching, where I wanted this class to share what beautiful teaching would look like. And if it was the ideal classroom, what would be the things that you would see in the ideal classroom? We have Brian coming in. And I have to tell you that the project died every time I did it. They're going, it's like they didn't want to share or they didn't know. I couldn't figure out why the project died. One day out of frustration, I said, I want, and by the way, I'm dyslexic, so I never write on the board. One of my students always wrote the notes and I process over on the side, because I invert everything. I still have the alphabet in front of me when I have to cut out pictures or letters for my wife on the saw. So I stand on the side and I say, okay, let's change this. Give me things that you would do if you wanted to destroy a child in a classroom. The board filled the things they would do, just filled. And then I said, okay, now your job is to take that list home tonight and invert it and tell us what it would look like to do it right. But I couldn't get them to share the positive without actually starting with the negative. Just fascinating.
Actually, our research, I did the same thing because David and Donna were working on their next book and a coaching program and everything for that work and the reactionary brain. And I said, you have to start the coaching process. And I developed something to where we just did it, where you take the group through them expressing all their concerns about the issues first. It's almost like once they get that on the board and push that out, then then they can stay open to, okay, let's describe what right looks like and what are you going to have, and they can go into the future. So yeah, this kind of stuff really interests us because it attaches to the rest of the work that the adventurers are going to do here next.
Well, the real challenge for each of us is to not remain in that negating setting. No, I'm serious,
Right.
because it's so
Absolutely.
easy to be there. Positive is not natural. Positive is not natural. You work at positive. I'm sorry, it just isn't. I'll tell you, for the fun of it, our daughter said, "Dad, I think you're going to really enjoy this show." And of course, we don't go anywhere. So if somebody tells us to watch a show, we usually just binge. And if there's 10 hours, we watch 10 hours. And so it was on iTV or Apple TV. And I don't know if I can get it anywhere else, but it's called Ted Lasso. So it's Ted, Losso. And it's about this football player that is down in Kansas at a R2 small college, and he wins the national championship. And so a owner of a soccer team in the UK decides to hire him to be the soccer coach because he won in America. He doesn't know anything about soccer. He's so stinking positive that eventually it starts rubbing off on people. And it's just fun to see a person that works at being positive. It's cool. I want to show what else this is important. We have, I did this recently for an article, and it's available on that site. But somebody said, why do we have a natural and adapted graphs? This is my graph when I moved here. That's an average. Okay, I'm a D, I'm an I, and C is pretty low and S is pretty low, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could talk about that. But look what happens when we divide 1 and 2 being adapted and 3 and 4 being natural. The adapted, oh my goodness, this looks different.
Mm-hmm.
And look what happens here to the natural. This was the year I left the university. Do you think we should have a conversation? I needed counseling. Look what's going on with that eye.
Wow.
Wow.
I'm an off-scale eye that had to walk into the office and walk by colleagues I didn't even want to be close to. And I certainly didn't talk to them.
Yeah.
It was time for a change, folks. So that's why we have 2 graphs. Let's talk about.
Can I ask you a question about natural and adaptive? Because I want to make sure I'm explaining this correctly. So what I understood you to say when I was listening to you one time was that is exactly what you just described. And when you pick our natural style, when the programming picks our natural style, it's from what we said we weren't, and our adaptive style, no.
Yeah.
Okay, correct me.
When you see and read the natural style, it's coming from what you're not.
Yeah, okay, right. Because that's what I'm more sure of, right?
You really are. You really
Okay.
are. The neurology and the research is crystal clear. Going back almost 100 years, we're able to find literature that supports this negation concept. And I'll tell you, it's survival. It's built into our DNA. Evolutionarily, survival requires knowing when to run.
Right. I always say the brain's number one job is to keep us safe. So it's got to remember the bad so that it'll keep us safe.
Yes. And in fact, neurologically, the connections they're lined up right beside each other. It's like there is a direct path to negation. Positive sort of floods the whole brain and eventually gets there. Negation is dead on. You pass me, I'll pass you. Well, it's just right there in your face. And you have to fight it. Yeah. And the higher your D, the more you have to fight it.
Dr. Ron?
Yeah.
I love that you just talked about positive and how if you're around someone who is positive, you can learn from that too. But I do know some negative people, and sometimes I think it's just an elephant in a room that no one wants to talk about. But then doing my disc, I've learned that this is just who they are, and just a negative person. But it's true what you said. If you're around someone that's continuously positive, it could just change them. And I'm thinking of someone from outside, and I've watched them change just for being around positive people.
Yeah.
Well, I want to interject there just because I do want to ask Ron about this, because we really stay away from positive and negative as much as sort of proactive, reactive, and the fact that I can't look at someone's disc and tell whether they're negative. So I want to be sure that I was clear in explaining this was more from the science of how these natural scores come out and how these adaptive scores come out. Because it's all perspective. Actually, negative and positive is very subjective, right?
Absolutely.
So if somebody disagrees with me, I think they're being negative, whereas they're just, Alan disagrees with me all the time. He's usually just being factual in his approach to me. And so what I heard you say was more like the brain doesn't have like you have to really work hard at that, knowing what you want and being in that proactive space, because your brain's going to take you directly to the lower level threat as quickly as it possibly can to keep us safe.
Yeah. And this has a yin and yang to it. Obviously, if you ignore this is bad. But this is a lifelong journey, folks. And it's an exciting journey, because every day we are challenged with opportunities that we can view in two ways. And we have to constantly practice viewing these opportunities. Who knows if it's good or bad? You just have to put it in a context and start analyzing, and we're growing. This is what's exciting about what you're doing, each of you, is that you are adding vocabulary to gut level feelings that some of us have had all our life but never been able to really understand. We do things, but we didn't know why. And now we're starting to learn why. And then the next step is being able to control it and not just know it. In other words, being an off-scale D is an explanation, not an excuse. All right? I'm an off-scale D, so I'm in your face all the time and I'll say what the hell I want. No, that's inappropriate. Learn, grow.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just sort of exciting. I find it exciting to think that I'm on a path that I get to look forward. And yes, I will make mistakes. And in the words of Ted Laszlo, remember to be a goldfish. He says that in The Stupid Show. And I knew what that meant, because a goldfish has a long-term memory of 8 seconds.
Well, let me double click on that. Amy, is that making sense?
It is. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Ron. Thank you.
So imagine that a goldfish says, okay, I goofed up. This is not appropriate. That was terrible. What did I learn from it? And now I need to go forward. They don't ruminate on it. There's a lovely book. It's titled Why Zebras Don't Have Ulcers. And it starts off with this lovely story about a zebra being chased by a lion. And he's going across the Serengeti, and the lion is after him. And actually, he outruns the lion. And as a result, the book says, so did the lion then go back to the herd and say, you cannot believe the day I had? He does not go into therapy for 10 years about the lion that just keeps giving post-traumatic stress. He goes back to grazing. And some of us need to be able to go back to grazing after chaos in our life. Oh, I've given you too much, am I?
You're doing great.
Actually, before we move on, could I ask a question on that adapted natural style? Because I had a couple of questions on that, and I'll limit it to one. Just in terms of definition of the natural style and adapted style, are we looking at it in terms of a sense that natural style is, say, our instinctual reaction, and adapted style is kind of a conscious decision on how we react within are scenarios, or is there a different deviation between the two?
Well, Sean, those are appropriate definitions and appropriate words. They probably wouldn't be the exact words I use, but you think about the natural being the real you. And every morning, here's where I would differ with you. Every morning you get ready to go into your lived life, and the adapted starts to fall in place. Okay, today I have to do X, Y, Z. I will meet with so-and-so, I will do. And so then the adapted starts to take over your behavioral reactions, which are subtle. In some cases, they're identical. Many of us have graphs that are virtually identical. You think about my graph that's in front of you. They were not identical. I got up and I got a faculty meeting this morning. I got to learn to keep my mouth shut today. That was what's going on in the adapted compared to when I woke up excited. So it's just that transition that occurs. While I have this graph on there, Linda, you had another question I want to address. What happens when you see a graph that everybody is within 10 points of the 50, 10 points of the energy line? And you get a note that comes across the computer that says, you know, you probably need to focus at a time when you can really think about things. I'll tell you why it says that. You're answering both ends of a spectrum in strong reactions that are virtually counterproductive to each other, counterintuitive to each other. You're giving both ends of a spectrum in an assessment, and the assessment goes, you can't be both. Which is it? I have my very first hire. I used DISC in the hiring process, but I didn't trust it. And this lady just looked like she'd be a great secretary. And so I hired her, and she basically had a straight line on her graph. I think the diagnosis the doctor used was schizophrenic.
Oh.
Oh, she was trying to be all things to all people, and she had no clue who she was. And I started to realize, maybe I ought to be paying attention to this assessment.
Yes. You know, what we notice when they come back like that is my first thought, and I think you guys say it in the email that comes back to us at the alert, is sort of, we look for heavy levels of stress. Like, is this person responding in this way to the assessment like that because they're under a great deal of stress? And so my first thought is to sort of reach out and ask a lot of questions about when they took it, how they took it, what were they thinking while they took it, what's their situation right now, to be able to see why it might have come out like that, you know?
Thank you. Do not do a debrief of these things with yourself or anyone else by telling them what it says.
Yeah.
The instrument opens a door for conversation about what it says. It's not black and white. It's simply an indicator of where there's smoke, and maybe we want further conversations.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not intended to be clinical. At that point, I no longer could work with that. Her name was Linda too. I could no longer help her. I mean, this instrument is designed, when they have problems like that, I'm not prepared. I'm not a psychologist.
Yeah.
So you can help me with that question, by the way. I'm giving serious thought to going back for another master's. I think that could be fun. Let's look what happens to my brain imaging in a class, or a dynamic, a team dynamic. Recognize that you're going to, not only, as Amy pointed out, you're going to have DISCs that differ, and they all require different behavioral styles to interact appropriately. You also have emotions going on based on the topic. And you will have sincere agreement going on. You know, they're with you, happy-go-lucky team members. They're engaged, but they're at peace, and they're not going to be rambunctious. They might be disagreeing with you. They might actually be in conflict with you, or they could actually be enraged by the scenario. And this graphic helps you start to look around the room and trying to figure out where everybody is. And I'll tell you where I want people. I do not want this going on, obviously. Right. However, I'm not too keen on this going on, because this is a team, and we are together so that we can all come up with something that is better than any of us individually. And if I don't have some disagreement, some conversation, we don't have things happening. I don't like disengagement. They're looking at their cell phone. I don't like that. But I do want some disagreement, and I want some engagement, just back and forth, dialogue, back and forth. Right?
Right. Well, yeah, because once you get the overreaction, they can't be in their prefrontal cortex to think at their highest level with you. Like, you really want all those different parts of the brain. And when people are taking things personally because of your tone or your approach, like it takes so much time on a team to be able to build that trust and give each other a ton of grace.
Yes.
Right.
You used the term. It's very important, Linda, to realize that when you're in this overreaction mode,
yeah,
you literally have actually cut off the oxygen flow to the prefrontal cortex.
yeah.
Your executive functions are drastically reduced. Everything becomes zeros and ones. Everything is reduced to its common lowest denominator because you cannot think. You're simply reacting. And I think that's important to understand neurologically what's going on. And I might also add that if you have some teenagers around the house, the prefrontal cortex, until age maybe 28, and now they're pushing it into the 30s, is not completely myelinated. In other words, you think of the prefrontal cortex as a bunch of wires, and if they don't have insulation on the wires, they cross wire and they don't fire correctly. The prefrontal cortex is not myelinated, does not have insulation on the axon until late 20s. They're not making good decisions, folks. They do need help.
You know what I always say is, like, the damage I did to my brain in college and when I was in my early 20s before my brain was even formed. Like, can you imagine if we spent our early 20s as those final things were being formed, and our most, like, a CEO of our brain, you know, in a lot of meditation and healthy and everything like that. But yeah.
Well, of course, I'm a goldfish there. I can't go back, but I have actually had similar thoughts, and I've worried about, you see, I'm a little older than some of you. So 1968 involved Haight-Ashbury in ways that there was a grocery store in the corner, and above the grocery store, there were a group of us that would recite poetry in the afternoons. And the best poetry came when you were on LSD. It was just awesome. All right. How are decisions made? I don't want any of us to be puppets. I want us to understand more about who we are and those around us. We get into it maybe for the wrong reasons. I got into it so I could, because my students were all goofed up and I wanted to make them perfect, only to realize I was the one goofed up. So being a puppet becomes important. Without self-awareness, our assessments open doors to new personal insights. And here's some of the insights that we can open up with these assessments. We start to realize that where our beliefs come from. We start to question our beliefs. We start to realize that prejudice is part of each of us. And then we start to think about whether it's appropriate or not. Where did it come from? We have hidden triggers, every one of us have had hidden triggers. We have implicit memories. I want to differentiate explicit memories from implicit. Explicit memories is something happens and it's immediate flashback and the whole scenario floods your mind. Implicit memories is you get a gut level feeling that doesn't feel right, but you don't remember why. And the implicit memories are crucial, folks. They are driving the bus for way too many people. They don't even remember why they feel that way.
Have you read Change the Culture, Change the Game, about the experiences pyramid? Because we use that a lot in class, and this group has learned that, where our experiences have created our beliefs. And I always say those are our motivators, and then it drives our actions, which are observable, which are our disc. And, you know, that's interesting. This whole, I've never broken it apart as far as implicit and explicit memories, but those experiences, those memories that we have that are driving those motivators, driving forces, right, that are almost like just coming from our gut, but we can't really remember exactly what's driving that.
And it's both a nature and nurture. And this is the good and bad news again. There are certain things in our behaviors that are actually coming straight out of genes. Kathy, and I can't remember her last name now, at Harvard, has recently discovered 3 genes that when you have them, they are on-off switch for your ability to be receptive to placebo effect. They literally can be aligned with these genes, whether or not you are willing to accept some phenomena like medicine. And I have to tell you, I'm a scientist, so there's a lot of things that my entire life I have called woo-woo.
Really? Yeah.
One of them is acupuncture.
Oh,
Okay?
really?
So, but I'm trying to grow. So I actually had a TMJ doctor say, maybe you should try acupuncture, because my jaw was locked. I had 20 millimeters is all I could open. I couldn't eat a hot dog. I love hot dogs. I couldn't eat a hot dog. So I go to this acupuncturist, and he spends 45 minutes talking to me.
Yeah.
And then we do the procedure. So I go back the next week, because I promised him I'd do 2. And I said, what was this 45-minute crap with? And he said, I needed to know whether I should even do this with you.
Yeah.
I thought that was fascinating, that he actually sort of was analyzing me to decide if I was open to the possibilities.
Ah.
When you're open to possibilities, the world opens up.
Yeah.
And then we can deal with emotional triggers. We can deal with subconscious thoughts and precognitions and personal bias and values. And this one upsets me, this last one, because this is something to be discussed in the bar over a good beer, free will.
Ah.
I actually have started a paper, and I need to finish it, called Free Won't. Because there is free won't. I'm not convinced there's free will.
Oh. Yeah, that's interesting. Can you go back to that last slide? I was
If
just
you
making a
insist.
couple of notes. The free will, values.
I know this is a little off target, but there's such richness to what you're doing that I sort of wanted just to flood the open possibilities. And again, I have to share that as a scientist, there are so many things that I negated in my life that I'm now trying to recognize the errors of my ways.
Yeah.
And homeopathic medicine is one of them, because the power of placebo is real.
Yep.
It's real. Being positive causes things to change. And it's only a perception. It's a position you take. And these are things that are really crucial. As a result, I read, and I'm doing a lot of research on meditation. And again, some people think that's woo-woo. I can tell you, I can lower my heart rate. I can change my body temperature. I can do things that are real. And it's all being done by my head.
Can I ask you something? In the conversational intelligence that these folks are going to be learning with us on, I don't know if you've read any of that with Judith Glaser. It's sort of the neuroscience of leadership, but she talked about appreciation being the one thing that really lights up our entire brain. That when we appreciate things, appreciate other people, that us appreciating them being appreciated, like lights up the use of all parts of our brain is much more capable than if we're like in reaction space, would be the lowest level, right? Running from the lion.
Yeah, you've described it very well. That's exactly what happens. And actually, see, we keep trying to pigeonhole things and saying, well, this religion is better than that religion, or this meditation is crap and this one is better, and yoga is good, but this is bad. I got news for you. It's all gray. They all have elements that are in common that we keep trying to ignore. The commonality to all of these is what you were just saying. Buddhism is nothing more than being in the moment.
Right, being present.
Dharma.
Yeah, I've been doing mindfulness since COVID started every Wednesday with an extremely small group of 3 or 4 of us. And for the first time I've ever done social noting. So mindfulness to me used to be like a guided meditation, but once you go to the next level with social noting, it's really fascinating the level of focus that will give you, because you're like meditating, but you're also waiting for the next person to share. Like it's a really fascinating thing. It's almost like an entry door for any of you if you have not looked or been curious about any of these things, is to just try it, like even just a couple of minutes a day, to see what type of practice could be helpful. Some people are you know, like some people do meditation better if they're stretching at the same time. You need to find your formula. I mean, I think that's the one thing that when we do all these assessments with TTI, you start putting, I mean, how many different types can somebody be? You know, they're thinking there's 4, let's say, Ron, but there's like 366 or something when you add all the different numbers together and then start adding in the driving forces. And
It's actually more on the lines of being infinite when you think about possibilities.
yeah.
So for some people that gets to be, I want simple answers. There are no simple answers. Embrace the complexity and be excited by it.
Yeah.
We're not simple organisms. We're complex, but that's exciting.
So let me ask you one question. This is one more question, and then I definitely want to get more questions in case there's anything that I haven't asked or answered, or he hasn't answered. Is one of the biggest questions we get is, do we change over time?
Yeah.
And so I wanted you to explain that when it came to DISC. And then I think you have more of a, when I've heard you before, a different answer when it comes to that driving forces or that motivators, because they're different.
When you think about, and I don't know how aware everyone is of our 5 sciences, but basically let's just talk about 4 of those sciences for a moment. There's a continuum as to whether, how you change. And the most solid is actually the DISC, the behavior assessment. You can go through life, and if you have no crucial events, critical events in your life, you can be pretty stable. And when I say pretty stable, we're able to assess people down to about age 6 to 8. And some people will remain pretty stable from that point on. On the other hand, when you get married, when you have some traumatic stress of some kind happen, a loss of a loved one, loss of a job, being fired, these things can affect that behavior, and they will affect it dramatically. My eye is back up, but it was not when I was at the university. All right, I had reached a point where my vision for education was so out of whack with the faculty around me. I thought, I just can't exist here. This doesn't make sense. Of course, by the way, I was right. But at any rate, the next one are your motivators. And your motivators are values. And yes, our values can change a little bit. For example, I'm at an age where I actually think about my net worth. Could I retire? Do I have the ability to do something different? Do I want to do something different? So then the next one after that, I would say would be your skill set, DNA. And we can grow skill sets, and we can lose some skill sets. And I'm excited about the work we're doing on those competencies and some of the ways that we're identifying. And by the way, somebody says, hey, it's a self-assessment. You just told me you're a leader. That doesn't prove you're a leader. I'd love to show the research that says if you say you're a leader long enough and to enough people, you are a leader.
Interesting.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, folks.
Fascinating.
And the research, again, is sort of like the comment about being positive. It takes a hold over your being. The last one is EQ, emotional quotient. Emotional quotient can change on a dime. I could get a call right now from my daughter, and she's got something that got screwed up in her life, and I can go from clear to red instantly. We can change that quickly when it comes to the emotions. Now, the real goal for people that have emotional intelligence is to let it go instantly. I didn't say stop it. You can't stop it. It's going to come. You got to learn how to let go.
Right. Like let it pass through you. Somebody told me like if you're constantly having the same emotions, you've talked yourself into it because it passes in like 90 seconds.
Let it go.
and you get a new one. So if you're, if you're only focused on your concerns and what you don't want, then you can stay in that state of mind and that state of feeling for a really long time, which goes back to Amy's
Years.
point and what you talked about, like how much work it takes to stay in a proactive state of mind, to stay in that space of appreciation and gratitude and connectiveness. It takes so much effort. Well, let's do this. Alan, number one, I want to make sure that there aren't any questions that you have for Dr. Ron that we haven't covered yet. Anything sticking out for you?
No, my biggest one was the change one that we just talked about.
Awesome. So who wants to jump in here and ask Dr. Ron any questions that we haven't covered, or double click on anything?
I'd have a question for you, Dr. Ron, and for you, Linda, as well, I guess. You talk about changing and how this course is kind of opening our eyes to all these different aspects of our thought process and our decision making. Will we be given the opportunity to take this assessment again at the end of the program or in a year to see how we've developed or changed, or is that too short of a time frame to notice changes like that?
No, but I would go back to the answer I just gave, that a lot of these things are pretty locked in, and it depends on the assessment you're using. I wouldn't expect major changes to occur in your behavior after this program. I would hope you understand your behaviors, maybe some changes in adapted. I wouldn't expect major changes in either behaviors or motivators over a couple of year period, unless there are critical events that occur in your life. I would expect some changes to occur with regard to some of the DNA competencies and the emotional quotient.
Yeah, that's what I was.
And that's up to your leader.
That's what I was
give.
literally thinking, and I love you guys, Adventure Nature, to be a part of this first one, because one of the things I've thought about is if we added another assessment, would it be the DNA or the EQ at the beginning of this course, so that as you go through your leadership journey with Haskell, that's the one those are the two assessments that we're consistently retaking that could show you, Dylan, like where some movement will have been. Because the DISC and motivators, I mean, the job isn't really to change those. The job is if you are a driver influencer, to be able to recognize that you are that's sort of your default behavior. And are you able to go, does this situation call for those default behaviors? or would it be better for me not to think this situation is urgent right now? Get a perspective from someone who's a CS, who may not see very many things as urgent, and see what they think. And so that's what right now we're just trying to get you to really actually embrace your scores, love your scores, go, what are all my strengths? What do I bring to the table? And can I communicate those strengths to other people that I'm working with in a way that I can bring out the best of me at work?
You're absolutely correct. And we need to recognize again that there are no good or bad out of any of this. It's contextual, and it's when learning to use it appropriately. In other words, I spent 30 years at the university. Only one semester did I not have a syllabus. I learned. My SCs wanted to know where we're going. I didn't need to know where we're going. They did.
I'm only laughing because we're so alike. This is the most structured course I've ever had to put together, and dang it, I'm doing it. I'm like creating the libraries. I'm like creating the tests. Like I am really going, they need an exact path when we're doing it this way so we can repeat it. But
during this talk, I got a text that they wanted my PowerPoint for tomorrow morning's 9 o'clock presentation. And I texted back, it's tomorrow, not today. and my D, I live on adrenaline. I'm an adrenaline junkie. And the longer I can put crap off, the more adrenaline I get when I put it finally together. And so I have to fight not putting stuff off to the last minute, because I know I have always come through. And so I have this belief that it'll happen again.
Yeah. Which is, you know, what I would tell to all DIs out there is that it works really well when you're by yourself to do it that way. Where we struggle with in collaboration is other people can't work like that. If you're working on a team of 5 people, it might make you really great and like have all this adrenaline to do it. But we start falling apart the minute we have to start collaborating because people need things ahead of time. Right.
My wife's Christmas gifts are already bought and wrapped for next year.
Well, I think that's amazing. Yay.
No,
Okay.
that's a high C that just had to be done. What are